Welcome to the Council of Better Business Bureau's podcast, Better Business, Better Series, where we will explore top-of-mind topics with business and industry leaders to understand the leading trends and innovations that continue to push the envelope in today's marketplace.
Thank you for joining us on the Better Series podcast. I'm Nona Finn, your host for today's dynamic conversation. Well, we all just witnessed the longest government shutdown in American history. For 35 days, hundreds of thousands of government employees and contractors found themselves furloughed or working in essential jobs without pay. The effects didn't hit their world alone, but it's taken a toll on our marketplace and the overall economy. Joining us in the studio is Dr. Julia Heath, Director of the Economic Center at the University of Cincinnati and President of the National Association of Economic Educators. She's here to discuss the impacts that go beyond the individual level, but has implications for businesses and our economy. Julie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you, as I believe that this is an important conversation to have and topic to really hone in on for our listeners. You know, we've heard many of the individual stories of how the partial shutdown has affected over 800,000 federal workers who are furloughed or working without pay. But we all seem to be forgetting this shutdown is not an individual problem, but one that concerns all of us. Can you share with us how the individual effects, they spread throughout the rest of the economy?
Sure. The first kind of tier of effects, of course, centers around the individuals that were affected. We have over 800,000 federal workers who were not spending money for over a month. Consumer spending is about 68% of our economy, and when you have that number of people not spending as much as they otherwise would, that has significant effects on the economy. And the federal government is also a major producer of goods and services. So this wasn't a total shutdown, but just a partial one. But still, there were a lot of goods and services that were not produced economy-wide as a result of the shutdown. Now, when the shutdown ended, some of this activity came back into the picture. So workers will start spending again, and the federal government will start producing goods and services again. But there for over a month, the goods and services produced and the spending by these workers took a significant hit.
Absolutely.
But even beyond the federal workers, businesses that do their business with the federal government suffered tremendously as well. That's another about 2 million workers who work for private sector contractors. And unlike the federal employees, a lot of these workers will not get their back pay. And so any reduction in spending that these workers have experienced will not bounce back, or at least it will not bounce back as much.
That's a great point, absolutely, about those who are, from more of the public sector who were impacted. And there is no back pay. There is no catching up. It's sort of, it is what it is. Let's talk about geography for a bit. Are the effects of the shutdown, is it concentrated to just the D.C. and surrounding areas only?
I think that's what people think of mostly when you think of the federal government and partial shutdown, then, that affects this one part of the country. But in fact, while most federal workers are concentrated in D.C. And also Maryland and Delaware, the next states that feel the most effect from federal government shutdown, that have the largest per capita share of federal workers, are Alaska, Montana, New Mexico, South Dakota, and Wyoming. And I don't think people fully understand how far-flung the federal workforce is and how important it is to those kinds of economies, particularly when you're talking about very sparse populations. Cutting off that flow of federal money to those workers has a tremendous impact, because oftentimes the federal government is the employer in the area, and so there aren't other employers around who are paying wages and their workers are spending money. In these sparsely populated areas, sometimes the federal government is it.
Wow. That's a great picture to paint for us that helps us to see that this is definitely far-reaching, more than just the D.C. metro area. Let's talk numbers a bit. Can you share with us the effects by the numbers?
So there's been a lot of numbers floated out there. Standard & Poor's has said that by the time the shutdown ended last Friday, the total effect on the economy was about $6 billion. The Congressional Budget Office just yesterday, I believe, or just very recently, estimated that the effect on the economy was $11 billion. And of that amount, they estimate that only $8 billion will be that bounce back that I talked about earlier. But that $3 billion will just not come back. And that amounts to about 0.02% of GDP. And that doesn't sound like a big number, but what it amounts to in terms of rate of growth is about the GDP rate of growth will probably be about 0.4% lower in this first quarter of 2019 than it otherwise would be. But I think it's important to remember that even that Congressional Budget Office number, it doesn't take account of the indirect effects. So businesses that are relying on the federal government to issue them permits to engage in their business, or relying on the federal government to do other things, those effects are really, really difficult to hang a number on.
Yeah.
And so the CBO estimate does not include those indirect effects. So that $11 billion and the $3 billion forever lost, that might be a very conservative number.
Yeah. Another great picture that you're painting that most of us are probably not even thinking of. Let's talk long-term economic effects. As we know, as of now, we'll hear in a few weeks what direction will go in when it comes to the government and the decisions that they'll make about keeping it open or what decisions are going to be made overall about coming into an agreement. But so we won't know exactly what those long-term effects looks like. But can you really talk about the long-term economic effects that are particularly on business from this partial shutdown?
Well, one of the things I think that people don't think about, or at least readily think about, when they think about the effects of this shutdown, is on the workforce, and I don't mean the effect of the federal workers not getting their pay. I mean on the workforce itself. The longer this last shutdown went on, the more and more likely it was that these workers would start looking for other employment. Federal employment has long been viewed as a very stable career pathway. There are very well-defined rungs in your career ladder. It's got great benefits, good pension, all of that kind of thing. And so for many Americans, particularly African Americans, by the way, that they make up 18% of the federal workforce, so it's a disproportionate share.
Yeah.
For many Americans, federal employment has been this rock-solid opportunity for them. And the longer this shutdown went on, as I said, it became more and more likely that people were going to start jumping ship, and we're seeing reports of that surface. That, if I'm a federal employee and I have to worry about a shutdown every few years, it is no longer the stable employment that I thought it was. And the problem is that many, many federal employees are very highly skilled, and or their positions require extensive, sometimes months-long training programs.
Yeah.
So to the extent that people just got tired of waiting or have decided that casting their lot with federal employment is really not the stable road they want to choose, then employers, federal agencies, are looking at a very, very long timeline with trying to fill these open positions. And we have a very tight labor market right now. So filling those positions in a timely manner, I'm thinking primarily the IRS, that might be a challenge.
That's a great point, Julie. It's funny because, living in the D.C. metro area, I hear that a lot from friends and peers that, one of the number one reasons that they got into government or aspire to do so is that stability and kind of understanding their career path directly. So that is a great point to bring up. Like, wait a minute, if the thing that I believe was most important to me is now taken away, maybe it's time to look at other opportunities or other sectors to work in. Not to mention some of the I'm in Fairfax County, and our school system opened up the substitute opportunities to those who are furloughed to say, come, be a teacher with us while you are waiting. But yet I heard from a few that, hey, you know what, I like this. This might be my thing. So that's a really great point that you bring up there.
Yeah, people take jobs for all kinds of reasons, and salary is just one component. And like I said, while the federal government can offer a lot in terms of benefits and pensions and all of that kind of stuff, if it comes at the expense of you being constantly worried about if another shutdown is coming or not, a lot of people making that calculation may very well or may well have decided that it's just not.
Yeah. Well, what are some other business, marketplace, and economic effects of the shutdown that most of us might not immediately think of?
Well, two things come to mind. One is the lack of data. And, I know people think of, people that kind of pour through the data that the federal government produces, kind of think of them as just kind of wonks and, just going about their geeky lives, and that it doesn't really have that much effect except for satisfying their curiosity.
Right.
But that's not the case. While the federal government was partially shut down, the Department of Commerce was also shut down. The Department of Commerce was not on the list of agencies to be open. So most of the economic data that the federal government produces comes through the Department of Commerce. Labor stats do not. The Bureau of Labor Statistics stayed open, so unemployment data went ahead uninterrupted. But the Department of Commerce is the keeper of a lot of other economic data.
Yeah.
And far from just being of interest to geeks like me, businesses rely on this data in order to make current decisions, but also future investment decisions. So if businesses who are very embedded in importing and exporting, for example, if they don't have data, current, up-to-date, very stable data on what's happening day by day, hour by hour, then they're trying to make decisions just based on old data, on hunches. People who are in industries that complement the housing industry, for example. So if I'm manufacturing home furnishings, for example, I don't know, I have a whole missing month of housing data, and I don't know did housing starts go up or down, stayed the same. I need to make long-term planning decisions based on what another industry is doing, and I don't know what that other industry is doing because I don't have the data to tell me. So the lack of data is a really big deal. All eyes have been lately on the Federal Reserve. Are they going to increase interest rates? Are they going to stay the course? What are they doing? Well, They use over 32 different sources of data to make their decisions. Some of those pieces of data are not available to them as they go into their meeting. So lack of data.
That's a big one.
Is the one thing that I think people that would not immediately jump to mind as people think about what the effect of this partial shutdown has been. But the other thing is, that the fact that this shutdown went on for so long, it introduced a tremendous amount of uncertainty into the economy. And at a time where that was just the last thing we needed. The University of Michigan does a consumer confidence index, and the measure for December was about 5% lower than what it had been the year before. So consumer confidence was already kind of softening. Business confidence was already softening. And then you throw this on top. And, markets thrive on stability. Markets do not like uncertainty. And so I think this insertion of increased uncertainty into the economy is one of the unsung fallouts of this partial shutdown.
That's a great point, Julie. As we wrap up our podcast here and you talk about and mention uncertainty, one last question here, and I think it's a big one for our listeners. Will this recent shutdown cause a recession based on this uncertainty in this already soft market? What are your thoughts there?
I don't think that looking back, we're going to be able to say that partial shutdown of 1819, that threw us into the recession. I don't think that's going to happen. But as I said in answer to the previous question, uncertainty is not a good thing. Yeah. Uncertainty does not strengthen our economy, and so this has just been another brick on the load, if you will, in terms of showing an economy that's aging in this business cycle, and we have to remember this shutdown is over, but it's temporarily over. I mean, we have until the 15th of February to know what's going to happen after that. And so to the extent that uncertainty is a major factor at work here, that uncertainty didn't go away when the partial shutdown ended because we don't know what's going to happen on the 15th. So the economy is still working, trying to work with a lot of uncertainty. And I think that's going to continue until we see what happens on the 15th.
Yeah, I agree. We'll wait and see, right? Julie, thank you so much for participating in this important conversation today. We really appreciate you joining us on this.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you. And also for the shutdown, it may be over for now, but like you mentioned, we're kind of holding our breath and seeing what's going to happen on the 15th. So, let's all ensure that we're informed and helping where needed, because helping just one person is truly helping us all. We are hearing that here from this podcast. So thank you again, Julie. It was a great conversation that you allowed us to have with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to our Better Series podcast, where we bring you marketplace insights and trends. You could hear more great episodes on iTunes or any other streaming platforms. We'll see you next episode.
You just enjoyed Better Business, Better Series podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blueberry.com and subscribe. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the Better Business Bureau, Council of Better Business Bureaus, or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blueberry's Terms of Service.